Welcome to the Raef Granger podcast, and this segment is going to be on networking. I'm Raef Granger, and with me today is Zach, and I'll let Zach introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Zach Saunders. I work for Residential Mortgage Services. I'm a member of BNI in New Hampshire, and I'm a member of the Director Ambassador team for the state as well.
Yes. All right. What's today's topic of networking?
Alrighty, so we touched on our kind of opening one at a high level on all of these. So today we're going to do a deep dive into, not that it really matters which number they are, but number one on our keys to a successful presentation within BNI and also beyond BNI. So the number one on our list is, your big three goals of your presentation. So kind of at a high level, our big three goals are going to be start with why, what are your triggers, or what are your keywords, however you want to paraphrase that. And then the last one is the what I call the humble brag, or the you can trust me, I'm awesome section of it. All very important aspects to your presentation for a variety of different reasons. But really, this is why it was number one on our list, is just because these are sort of the big three things that if you accomplish nothing else in your presentation, if you can remember to focus on these as you're prepping for your presentation, you will have a successful presentation at the end of this. It may not be quite as polished as you want, but if you can really nail the three of these things, you're gonna be all right.
Love it. Yeah. It's ironic. Tomorrow I have my feature presentation.
Oh, really? Cool. What are you
I'm
doing?
wondering, as I was prepping it this morning, and I wonder if I'm going to hit any of the three. Let's see.
I think you'll probably hit all three. Okay, so
What's number one?
Number one is start with why. So starting with why, that doesn't necessarily mean, and I think we said this in the intro podcast, it doesn't necessarily mean like throwing a picture of your, significant other, or your dog, or your kids, or your nieces, or your nephews up there and saying, the reason I get out of bed in the morning is to provide a good life for these people. It's a little bit deeper than that. Again, my speaker notes here say, it's critical that your chapter members understand your motivation for the work that you do. This doesn't necessarily mean showing a picture, but it does mean digging down deep into the truer why of what you do. And then I have a side note here that says, think Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. If you're looking for, a good read, this really does touch a lot on that. And you actually, during our intro, mentioned something, and I can't remember about the book. It's one of the quotes, like, I'm going to butcher this, but it's nobody cares how much you know until you know how much you care. Mm-hmm. That type of phenomenon. And that's really, I think, important to starting with the why, because, again, I mean, as Stan Lee was famous for saying, every comic book could be somebody's first comic book. I like to think of every meeting could be someone's first meeting. And that could be just a visitor, could be somebody debating whether or not they're going to join your chapter. It could be somebody that's maybe been out on medical leave for a while and they're just kind of getting back into the room. So your presentation needs to sort of, it really needs to straddle that line between, I don't want to bore the older members, but I also don't want to go over the head of somebody who doesn't have any context or background for me. And that's why starting with that why is important, because it humanizes you and really levels that playing field across the room.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder too. This isn't just for BNI. Like, you can use this anytime that you're asked to give a feature presentation of any type. These are good pointers for that. And the second thing is, I was thinking about, like you said, the visitor in the room. I think there can be a tendency, I think I'm hitting my 6-year mark or my 7-year mark. There can be this tendency to be like, they've all heard it. They all know me. They all, like, especially with what you do, Zach, like, they know who I am. They know I'm a mortgage broker, a mortgage originator. They know I'm awesome. Right. What the heck else to know? But man, that visitor, like, there are just BNI stories after BNI stories after BNI stories of, like, the one visitor heard that feature presentation, and it generates, $100,000 that point forward.
I'm actually living proof of that.
You have
part
one.
of the reason I do actually. So part of the reason why this was number one on our list, and why, in my opinion, these three, the start with why, what are your triggers, and you can trust me, I'm awesome. The reason that those came out as number one on our list of, keys to success is because of actually this exact scenario. So this was a number of years ago. We were meeting at the School of Mechanical Trades. It was, it's got to have been, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago at this point, probably. But I had my feature presentation, and I'm standing up there, and it was kind of one of those, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I tend to go a little bit like kind of out on left field when it comes to presentations, because I kind of like I call it the conch shell pattern, where like, you kind of start in the middle and work your way out bigger and bigger circles. And all of a sudden you just drive it home. And it's like, you see that aha moment of, I didn't know where he was going, and now it all ties together and it all makes sense. So I like doing that. So I was kind of in the middle of that. And my presentation was based around the idea of like a squeaky wheel gets the grease. That expression, what does that really mean? It really means once you know that there's a problem, you become very motivated to fix that problem. You could have 3 tires that are wildly out of balance, but the one that's squeaking is the one that gets your attention. And
Yes.
so I talked about like what the squeaks are in my business. What are the pain points to listen for? What can we do, or how can you proactively listen for individual terms, phrases, expressions, triggers that would lead to good referrals for me? And I actually mentioned something about recent college graduates who were debating between moving home or getting an apartment with friends, and taking a look at how do we strategize and how do we structure so that if they're going to move home, we take advantage of that first year to save money for a down payment, make sure our credit's in good shape, make sure we have our ducks in a row financially, as well as just sort of psychologically to become a homeowner. And then looking at weighing the pros and cons of renting for a year versus living at home for a year versus buying right away, et cetera, et cetera. And a visitor in the room had a son who was graduating in May from college, and they had been having this conversation about what we're going to do. Our mom and dad going to help us with the down payment, things of that nature. And he came up to me after the meeting and said, "Hey, can we talk?" And I said, "Sure." And so that turned into a deal for his son. I ended up doing a deal for him. I ended up doing a deal for their daughter a few years later when she graduated. And then I ended up doing work for the one of the uncles and one of the aunts, not married, but individually. So it ended up over time, over the last half decade or so, it's turned into 7 or 8 transactions of mine.
Right.
All because, I took a real baseline approach to my presentation. And I started with why, and my why in that scenario. And again, your why can be kind of a living, ever-changing thing, and it can kind of be situational depending on the type of presentation you're giving. So don't feel like your why is a set in stone why, because sometimes your why can be multifaceted. And if you pull a small little section of it out and use that as kind of a starting point for the rest of your presentation, that can be powerful. So my
Do you
why
have any
was,
tips of how to get to your why?
well, yeah, I wasn't really ready for that question. Let me see.
Because it makes it the best question.
It does. It absolutely does. All right, let me chew on that for a second. I think for me, I think boiling down my why for me started off with like a pain point or an anger point. And by that, what I mean is, like, I remember buying my first house. And I remember being spoken to like I was another number in in a series of numbers that was just getting pushed through this cycle. And I remember having
Oh,
questions, and I remember like how frustrating it was. And I remember sitting down at the closing table, and my girlfriend at the time, now wife, and I are sitting down there, and this woman comes out from behind, a door, and this big conference room table. And we're sitting down, and she slides this piece of paper across. And it's the first time I've seen it, because this is back in the day before you had to have things out a certain amount of days ahead of time. And I'm looking at it, and I'm kind of running through it, and she's obviously agitated that I'm not just signing things. And
aha.
there was a math error on what was called the HUD 1 at the time. It's now like the closing disclosure, but there was a math error on it. And I said, well, there's a mathematics error on here. And she goes, it's a really complicated form, sir. There's a lot of numbers. And I go, that's fine. I go, there are a lot of numbers, but there's still a math error. And she and I argued back and forth, and it got to the point where I was about to leave, like stand up and just say, like, I'm not signing something that's not right. And she, again, never got hostile, like none of that, but she was like very clearly agitated that I wasn't signing this piece of paper.
Yeah.
And so to make what's already a long story short, she ended up going out in the back room again. And she came out, and somebody else came out and apologized profusely that there was a math error, and it was in their favor over $600. So I said, that's frustrating to me, because I know that if I hadn't been somebody that was looking very diligently at the numbers, and this had only come out moments before I had to show up at the closing table, that's not a good way to do business. It's not.
Right.
There's got to be a better way. And so my better way, which became my why, is I remember how that felt And I don't ever want a client to feel that way. And, that really shapes a lot of the approach that I have for how I deal with my clients. And then in turn, that's a message that I like to share with my chapter, because I feel like knowing my motivation for why I handle things the way I do, and I guess the fact that I don't want that frustration to become cyclical with other customers, I think is an important thing for people to know about me and my team and how we operate.
I also can't imagine a world where, and again, we don't know her on that given day, but I just can't imagine a
Sure.
world where somebody says to you, hey, there's a math error. And you go, oh gosh, I hope
No.
not. Let me check.
Yeah.
Versus,
Right.
no, there's not. Right.
Well, that, and also like, the approach of, sir, these are very complicated forms, a lot of
Oh,
numbers. I'm
yeah.
like,
And that too.
you don't you can think I'm dumb, but please don't tell me I'm dumb. Right.
Right. Right.
So
I'm trying to think of,
that's kind of the why.
I'm trying to think of one, I would, so if you're wondering, how do I get to my why? One is watch Simon Sinek's video, TED Talk, 100 million views or whatever. He's a thought leader.
Right.
It's on YouTube. Find it, watch that. That explains it. And then I guess it could be, I just learned this trick from a friend of mine, a BNI member, and it's the ask yourself why. Well, I like to see people's faces of when they're get put into homes. Why? Almost act like your own inner 3-year-old. Just keep asking
Right.
yourself why and see if new answers pop up. And when you get to new answers, and maybe don't be afraid. Like the kind of work I do with people, the inquiry work that I do with people is, I always say something like, hey, if you could wave a magic wand, what would it be? So when you're doing your why, don't, like, if something that you think is crazy comes up, still write it down. It could connect you to a deeper level,
I'm trying to remember who it was. I want to say it was Tim Roberts, but I might be making this up. But I remember like a number of years ago, we were kind of going through this exercise in the chapter. I'm fairly certain it was Tim. Not important, but I think it was Tim. But we were going through this exercise in the chapter, and he had said something along the lines of, and I'm going to paraphrase slightly here because I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was, when you're trying to get down to your why, ask enough questions to get the right answer, not to get an answer. Because to your
I like
point,
it.
you could say, okay, why do I do what I do? Well, I do what I do because I like seeing people get into houses. Why? Well, because, it's good to see them accomplishing a goal. Okay, why? Well, because, and you eventually drill down to, well, I had a terrible experience and I want to save other people from having that terrible experience. And
Right.
I can't save everyone from having it, but I can do my part to save as many people as I can. And that kind of becomes your why. And then from there, you can pull out pieces and right.
Yeah. Love it. What's tip number 2?
So that's tip number 2 is triggers. Triggers, keywords, phrases, things of that nature. So identifying what these are and how you want to communicate that to your group is important when it comes to triggers, but also teaching your group how to listen for those triggers and then also what to say afterwards to make a connection, start a conversation, or establish maybe like a potential for a referral for you. Because, like a great example would be, let's say you've got a florist, and the florist says, I'd really love to get into funeral homes. They oftentimes refer people out for flowers, things of that nature. A good thing to listen for would be somebody that has a loved one that recently passed away, and you're trying to figure out which funeral home they utilized. Well, that's great. Now I know what to listen for, but I don't know what to say. And it's not like I'm going to say, Raef, I heard your aunt passed away. Where's the funeral home? Oh, it's over at Panoof. Oh, yeah, it is. Okay, great. Now what?
Right.
So having those triggers and then the follow-up of what to say afterwards. And that I feel like is one of those things that's critically important and really often missed. And we're all guilty of it from time to time. You get rolling on your presentation, and next thing you know, you've thrown out a couple of good things to listen for, but you forgot to do the follow-up. And so this kind of all gets back to that prep ahead of time to making sure that you're discussing the triggers, but then also discussing how to follow up on those to establish that potential for referral.
And I've got a good BNI rant on this, and it is critical. The what to say part, the trigger and what to say. And if you're saying something like, so just tell them, a great financial advisor and hand them my card. If you catch yourself saying that, I would urge you to throw that out and stop saying that, because it's not real. It's not really what somebody's going to say. Now, this is where the rubber meets the road with BNI. I've been fortunate, and why I'm an advocate of BNI or any personal networking is I've earned a lot of revenue over the years from what I call working the BNI machine. And this is one of those areas that needs to be worked, which is this. Okay, as a business coach, I work with people who overcome fear and doubt with what they really want. Okay, so I've got that. All right, great. Now, Zach, I look at Zach as a relational referral. He's meeting with business people. Okay, so if I say, oh, one of the triggers is somebody says, man, I'm really swamped. I don't know. I'm just not getting the hours I want with my family. I'm starting to get concerned. What we typically say in BNI, and I'm guilty of it too, is saying things like, hey, I've got a colleague that could really help you with that. Okay, pause. Is Zach really going to say that in the meeting at that time? Probably not. I call it the awkward leap. If the trigger comes and what I suggest is to be said is too awkward in the moment or too weird to be said or comes out of left field, it's just not going to work. Okay, so what do we do about it? What we do is I go have a one-to-one with Zach. Here's the work. And I go, hey, Zach, you're probably meeting with potential clients of mine. He's like, yep. And you're probably meeting with potential mine. Yep. And then say, I can't figure out for the life of me how to get you across the table where they might be expressing how frustrated and, they are in work, and you might sense they could use some help in business coaching. Can we work together on something that they may say, that you may say, to open that door? And then the two of you can put your heads together, and Zach can come up with the words that'll be more organic for him to say in that moment. And it's up to
that's a really good point. And that's a much better way of putting it than I was going to put it is you're exactly right. It's I need to instruct you on what to listen for, but then we need to work together on what you say, because my words coming out of your mouth don't sound right. Your words coming out of my mouth don't sound right. So how do we, again, how do we rework? How do we hone the fine edges of that machine to make that feel organic enough that I am comfortable saying that on your behalf?
Right. And that's why it drives me crazy. Where I'm like, BNI, if done properly, and this is what we're teaching you, can earn you a lot of revenue. And so when people are like, yeah, I did BNI, it didn't work for me, I didn't get the referrals I wanted, I'm like, guaranteed they didn't figure out what every one of those members needs to say in that moment. They didn't have the one-to-ones. They didn't sit back and go, God, my 60 seconds like I do stink. My triggers may be good, but I don't have the right language to get the referral ask or whatever. And so that's where the work is. And the members are there and they'll help you. So ask them to be like, is what I'm saying going to work for you? And then be honest. You have to be honest and say, no, it's not.
Yeah. Correct.
So, yeah.
But so it's funny. So I had a virtual one-to-one with a fairly new member. I think he's a couple of months into BNI. And he was kind of picking my brain about ways to, as he put it, shorten his J curve, meaning like the amount of time it takes before he starts becoming profitable in BNI.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I kind of said to him, and this is a message that I relay to newer members frequently, because I think it's really important, is, you've got what I would call like casual networking events, things like chamber meetings, things like that, where you can go, you can not go. If you show up, great. If you don't, great. You may have a conversation, you might find some business, but it's not structured in the same way that BNI is. BNI is a very targeted, focused type of networking. And you need to be willing to put in the work for it. Now, it doesn't mean that BNI has to be a 10-hour-a-week job, but it does mean things like what you're discussing, like making sure that one-to-ones are being focused and productive, making sure that you are asking those important questions. And one of those important questions can be a little hard to take the feedback on. And one of those things is, Raef, is what I'm saying resonating? And be prepared for them to say no, because the best favor they can do for you is say no. And here's why, because it's going to make you better. But I think a lot of people stray away from, or shy away from asking that tough question, because it can be kind of a hit to your ego, especially if you're somebody that, considers yourself a good communicator and considers yourself good at this networking thing. You may find that, after 3 years, your best potential referral source in that room has only passed you a couple of deals. Well, how come? Ask the tough question, and again, that may, getting back to our, current topic here, that may influence what you're asking for triggers. That may influence how you're choosing us to help you, develop those relationships. And then, kind of on that same note, I think a really important thing to keep in mind when it comes to the triggers and what to say as follow-up is remember that you're teaching us to sell you, not to be you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another important thing when it comes to that. What do you say when you hear the trigger is, you know, I know enough about your career to sell you. But if I know too much, or if I start taking advantage of the fact that like I know like bits and pieces of other things, I might undermine your credibility by accident by saying too much. So knowing how to say enough, teaching us what to say and when to stop.
Right. Critical.
Really important. Yep,
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah. I had another thought about a little cow pathway on one-to-ones, but it escaped me as I was listening to what you're saying. So, okay. So to come back around, remembering this in the feature presentation, some are 6 minutes, some are 10, or if you're not a BNI and you're just giving a feature, it's give the people what they're going to hear, what are the triggers, what are they going to see if it's a site one, and then what do we say? And then Raef and Zach's extra advice is, quote, make it real. And if you can't think of a way to make it real means like that person in that moment would really say it. And if you can't figure out what that would be, go have a one-to-one. So Zach, the one I found came to me by accident. One of my members found it, and he had referred somebody to me, and I was like, wow, how did you go from talking to them about, he's in the building trades. I'm like, how'd you go from talking to them about the building all the way over to business coaching? And he's like, oh, she mentioned that what she was doing and how she was growing in her business. And he said, hey, who's helping you with that? And I was like,
Ooh, I like that.
that's brilliant. Because first of all, it's open-ended. It's not pitchy. And I'm like, that's brilliant. So that almost works in a lot of scenarios. So if Zach is in a meeting and he does hear a business person expressing frustrations about X and Y, it's very organic for Zach to go, hey, who's helping you with that, by the way? And if they go, no, I'm totally good. Oh, okay, well, if you change your mind, I have somebody who might be able to help you, or whatever's organic for Zach to say. But that's an example of what I mean of making it real.
So one last thing on the triggers before we move on to the last section here is, you know, we were talking a lot about like conversational triggers, verbal triggers, you know, audio triggers. Remember that triggers can also be other things. You know, it may not necessarily be something to listen for, maybe something to look for. You know, if you're a roofer, you know, that not a lot of people are going to, you know, chit chat about the, you know, hey, I got these great shingles, they're purplish, they're wonderful, blah, blah, blah. But you may, you know, you may be out somewhere with somebody who's complaining about a leaky roof. Okay, that's a verbal trigger for a roofer. But you may also say, you know, one thing to look for is, you know, on the south side of your house, if you have, you know, shingles that are bulging, or if you have sections of your roof that don't look flat anymore, or the shingles are lifting, you know, that might also be a good referral from it. And that becomes a visual trigger.
I have a good example of that too. Our sign guy will do that. He'll say, hey, if you see like a strip mall going down, or, you know, something's being rehabbed, you see a bunch of construction trucks, let me know the address. We don't have to find out who owns it. He's like, let me know the address. I'll do my digging. They probably need signs. I'm like, that's great. That's doable, right? Drive down the road. Oh, 64 Islington or whatever. Yeah. Cool. What's the third one?
Cool. Third one is the, I call it the Humblebrag. It's the, you can trust me, I'm awesome. This one is, the reason it's in the number one slot in, you know, in our order of, you know, your presentation cues is because I think this is an important one that I think people get nervous about. It's tough in a presentation to, again, kind of find that fine line between like braggadocious and like self-deprecating. Like you kind of need to do a little bit of both. But you know, the you can trust me, I'm awesome, or you can trust me, I'm motivated, or you can trust me, I'm really good at this, or you can trust me, I'm experienced. However you want to paraphrase that for yourself in your presentation. You know, this is an important one too, because we want to know that you're not just a nice guy or a nice woman, that you were good at your job. It's important for us to know that, because if I have a referral for you that falls in my lap and they go, tell me about, you know, him or her, and I go, oh, they're really nice. Okay. They're really good at their job. Okay. Oh, they're great, and here's why. And you have that story element that you can bring in. And that's that, you know, the humble brag, the I am really good at this because of X, Y, and Z. I'm really good at this because I help people in this way. I'm really good at this because of blah, blah, blah. It doesn't have to be standing up and just going, I'm awesome, my poo doesn't stink, everything's wonderful, blah, blah, blah. But it does mean, you know, don't be afraid, especially if it's early in your BNI career, to talk about, you know, what makes you different, but also what makes you better.
Right. And Dr. Ivan Meisner and both Tim will say that you don't see referrals until people trust you. And so
Mhm.
I think this is one of the ways to build trust. I think that's a whole nother podcast that we have on how to build trust. There's lots of ways to do it, but one of them can be with the humble brag. And then I think if it's a story, it's even more memorable versus I did a really great job for X and Q homeowner or something. Like it can be, if there's a
Right.
story behind it, then I'm able to relay that and be like, hey, I heard about this story where fill in the blank, and then to my potential referee, and then it works a lot better.
And I think in our previous podcast that we recorded, I think we actually did talk about the stories sell,
We
facts
did.
tell and stories sell.
Yes.
And that's another thing to kind of remember in this section of your presentation is this is a good landing or a launching off point for you for stories. And remember, when it comes to your stories in your presentation, and I don't want to rehash the last podcast, but when it comes to your presentation stories, remember that your goal is not to give them a story that they then verbatim remember and repeat or regurgitate back up. It's to have a story that's got a couple of those good bullet points that they, meaning the people trying to find your referrals, can grab a hold of and kind of throw back out in a way that is memorable. They may not remember every single aspect of your, point A to point B story, but they may remember that in the middle of it, this one thing happened. And that one thing is something that I can speak to on your behalf to help secure you this referral.
Yes. Yeah. So those are our 3 tips. We don't have to go on for an hour, just for an hour. I have 2 asks for the listening members here. Number 1, Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, but if any of you within listening of our voice want to know more or feel like you want to grow in this area, just reach out to us by email. We'll give our emails. I'll put the emails in the show notes. And that's what Zach does as a director. That's what I did as a former director, and I'm still happy to do it. I retired as a director because I wanted to spend more time podcasting and reach more people than the way I was doing it as a director. But my point is, we're here to help. We're here to volunteer. Don't be afraid to ask. So, and if you're not in BNI, who cares? Email us anyway. And
Yeah.
number 2 ask is, I want your help in getting more listeners and reaching more people because I want to help as many people as possible. So if you could leave us a positive review, should you be so inclined, on your favorite podcatcher. You can catch us on iTunes. You can catch us on Spotify. I listen on Pocket Casts. Most of all the major podcatchers are having this podcast. And if there's a review function, give us a rating, hopefully a good one. And that way others can find out about us by, doing searches and things like that. So I'd appreciate that. You can reach me. I am Raef Granger. I am a business coach and corporate speaker. You can reach me at raef@raefgranger.com. And again, I'll put my email in the show notes. And you can reach Zach. Go ahead, sir.
Zachary.saunders at rmsmortgage.com. You can reach me there. You can also find me at zachary.saunders.com or zach.saunders.com. I have a bunch of them. They all redirect to my website. So feel free to reach out to me there. And then also, Rafe, to your point, if anybody out there is listening has any suggestions for future content or things they're curious about when it comes to the world of presentations, Rafe and I love feedback, and the series of items that we're going through as part of this podcast is all generated from other members within BNI that had questions about things or things that we had seen. So if you guys have any ideas for future content, we'd love to have the feedback.
Yeah, we have a list. I can't remember. It's 10 or 12. It depends on how we group them. It could come out as far as 8 podcasts. We don't know, but there's more content coming on how to improve personal networking, at least is our view. And so without further ado, stay tuned to the next special episode where Zach and I talk about Star Wars. All right. See y'all later. Happy connecting. All right, so we're recording now then. Okay.
Yep.
So this new podcast setup that I have, the old rig was old where I had to go into a mixing board and then buy a conversion plugs, I don't know, and that went into the computer. Well, but that was like 15 years old type of rig. Worked great though. But nowadays, the podcasting's so popular that the mic can plug right into the USB port of your computer.
Yeah,
Downside
I have
we don't have a mixing board, so we can't mix the sound. But today's Zoom and everything, these audio programs are pretty efficient. So
Yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised. I mean, given, the whole COVID-19 thing and everything else that's been going on recently, I mean, it's extremely unusual that I don't meet with people face to face at least a couple of times throughout the mortgage process. And there are people now that I've done applications, put them through processing. They've been underwritten. They've been conditionally approved, cleared to close, closed, went to a closing,
Yeah.
signed paperwork. They've moved into their house and I've never even seen them.
Oh my gosh, that is
It's
unusual,
unusual.
isn't
I
it?
mean, other than, like getting driver's licenses and yeah, it's strange. It's a weird world. Like I always kind of prided myself on, being, face to face with people because I feel like that's how you establish a good level of trust. And also, you get a lot more out of a face to face conversation, in my opinion. But this whole
Yeah.
wonderful world of Zoom has really eliminated the fact that maybe I'm too old school. So
Yeah, I mean, on some degrees, I imagine it's better, right? And some methods, it must be like, pretty cool. Roll out of bed, head downstairs. I'm right to work. There's no commute. There's no nothing. But on the other hand, we miss that interaction. Or frankly, maybe it's worse because now we don't have that downtime in 20 minutes in the car.
Well, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, I think in some regards, I really like the fact that I'm not driving places. It's also far less expensive because, a Zoom call versus even just like a cup of coffee or something like that, if you go out, or a snack or a
Right.
glass of wine or whatever it happens to be, it doesn't sound like much, but, a little bit here, a little bit there, and it really adds up. So, I mean, the cost savings of the gasoline, cost savings of not actually doing the face-to-face stuff, I think on some regards is really nice. But like I miss seeing people. Like I miss sitting down. Like the social aspect that I didn't really appreciate how important it was to me has really kind of become the thing that I'm really realizing that I miss.
Yeah,
But
I felt that same way too. As you can tell, I'm unpacking the microphone that's specific to this unit here. I'm trying to find the cord. Here it is. I did masterclass outside for the first time. Like we've been doing Zoom, and we all are like, ugh, can we, not
so you
do
actually
Zoom?
did like a face-to-face social distance
We did.
outside
Yeah.
masterclass. Wow,
Yep. We
that's
went
pretty nice, dude.
outside and we sat down for, hold on, confusion. Oh, yeah, we just said there's only 8 people plus me makes 9.
Sure.
And we had it. One of the people in there is a caterer, Mezzanine Catering, who's awesome, by the way. So shout out to Sally and Mezzanine Catering. I highly recommend her. And so she did our lunches. And we sat our chairs 6 feet apart. And it was one of those beautiful New England days. Oh, and we're by the water.
Right.
I'm on the coast.
Oh, nice.
So
Nice.
we were
Yeah.
out by the water.
Yeah, it's funny. So we have a lake house up in Maine, and last summer was so busy with work that I don't think we went up last summer at all. And this summer with all the COVID stuff, it's been a total nightmare trying to like even open camp up. And
Oh,
we're
right.
finally at the point now where it's like by 4th of July we should be able to go up there. But Ollie now is 4, so he's old enough now that he's really champing at the bit to get up there and go to camp. He wants to go swimming in the lake. He wants to see the chipmunks and the squirrels and the turtles and everything else. And it's it's hard to explain to a 4-year-old that some virus from somewhere else has now inundated everybody's entire life with nonsense and having to reschedule things. It's
Oh, is
he's
it
like
that you can't go up there?
well, until very recently, they had a 2-week quarantine. So if you went into Maine, you had to quarantine for 2 weeks. So for
Oh,
us to
right.
go up to a spot where we have
Right.
virtually no like internet and almost no cell phone service for 2 weeks during like the busiest time of the year is just never going to happen.
Yeah, it's
So
just not going to
we've been
happen
kind of
for you.
holding out, but yeah, but it looks like they're kind of easing the restrictions on that. So hopefully we can get up there, which would be nice. Hey, which BNI thing are we doing today? Which number?
Oh gosh, I was relying on you for that. I have no idea.
Where are you? Okay, hold on. Let me pull up my notes here.
We don't have to go by number.
Actually,
Let's just go by topic.
all right. Well, let me see what we got for topics. We did.
And I owe you an apology too.
For what?
Hold on, let me get my area situated.
Oh, is this the Spider-Man Captain America thing from last
Yeah,
time?
yeah.
Yeah.
Let me pull up my notes too because we need to keep track of that
Yeah.
too.
You know what? Let's do big 3 goals for the presentation today. We'll do start with why, triggers, and you can trust me, I'm awesome. Let's do those.
I love it. Okay.
Right, cool.
Well, let me start by my apologies. So, you were over here before COVID, and we recorded the first series of these podcasts, and you had said, "Oh, you collect Captain America," and I remember sitting here thinking, like, "Oh man, Zach doesn't know Captain America different from Spider-Man because I collect Spider-Man." And so I'm like, "No, no,
Right.
no, it's Spider-Man." And you looked at me with this quizzical look, like, "Okay, if you say so."
I mean, it was your podcast. I wasn't going to argue with you.
Right. And so then I was riding our Peloton, which I have and love, by the way, and it faces where you were looking, which is the shelf that houses this comic we were talking about, Amazing Spider-Man. But
Right.
but nevertheless, it's Captain America, and I'm like, oh crap, I owe Zach an apology.
Well, good. I mean, hopefully that buys
So
me back a little bit of street cred, because I have a feeling that somebody out there was probably going like, how on earth can Zach consider himself any kind of nerdy guy whatsoever and not know the difference between Captain America and Spider-Man?
right. And speaking of that, stay tuned for the episode after this. This is going to be a BNI and networking podcast, but stay tuned for after this because Zach and I are going to talk Star Wars. And we've
We are.
lightly debated this already, but we saved it for the episodes, and we're going to rank them in the order of which we think they're the best. So very, very controversial topic.
I feel like we're going to make some friends and make some enemies in the second podcast because I know my order, and I have a feeling someone's going to send hate mail about my order.
Yeah, same here. I think I'm going to get hate mail as well. All right. Well, hopefully,
All right.
I'm using a new podcast rig, so hopefully they're not hearing my typing. And Zach, why don't you? Well, here, I'll introduce this. So